Is God happy, or is God sad, or is God angry, or is God mad? It's a legitimate question that we need to ask of the Gospel of John. If God has become one of us, just what kind of God is this anyway? And the rest of John's Gospel is written to show us and to tell us what kind of God it is that has shown up in Jesus. Tonight in our gospel reading that we just read from John chapter 8, we encounter a woman who has been caught in the act of adultery. And the religious leaders of Jesus' day were out to trap him, to get him to say something or to do something that would give them reason to arrest him or maybe even put him to death. So they take this woman, they drag this woman early one morning to Jesus as he's there teaching a crowd of people. And they said, "What do you say, Jesus? Moses' law says that we are to stone her. In other words, we are to throw rocks at her until she dies. We're to kill her. What do you say, Jesus? Are we going to follow the laws and the rules of Moses?" And we ask, what kind of God is this anyway? What's Jesus going to do? What's Jesus going to say? She's made a mistake, clearly. She's guilty. So is this God in the flesh going to punish her and condemn her to death like the Pharisees want him to do? Or are we going to see in Jesus a different kind of God? What kind of God is this anyway? What are we going to see in Jesus? Have you ever made a mistake? Raise your hand if you've ever made a mistake in your life. Everybody's hands up. Something maybe that you had a hard time even forgiving yourself for. Or maybe you've done something that you thought, there's no way that God could forgive me or that somebody else could forgive me. I know I've made those kind of mistakes. But I want you to see what happens in this story. Jesus, instead of hammering her with just judgment and with condemnation, instead, he brings her incredible love, incredible grace, incredible compassion, and incredible forgiveness. He does the same for you and me. But before I get to that, I want you to notice something about this story. It's a good lesson for us. First, Jesus turns the fingers that are pointing at her, and he turns the finger back at the pointers. Do you know there are people sometimes, maybe sometimes we do it too, who kind of stand in judgment and we point fingers at other people and we say, look how bad they are, or I can't believe that so-and-so did that, or what a mess their life is. It's easy to kind of stand in judgment of other people. That's what the Pharisees were doing with this woman who was caught in adultery. They were pointing their fingers at her, saying, she's condemned, she's a sinner. But Jesus teaches a lesson. It's the lesson that you've learned. Remember, when you're pointing a finger at somebody else, you have fingers also that are pointing back at you. That maybe you and I are not so different than those people that maybe we want to judge. Jesus is saying to the Pharisees, guess what? When you're pointing a finger at her, you're also pointing fingers at yourself. You're just as guilty. And he says, you think you're so much better than this woman who's made a mistake? And he says, let the one cast the first stone who hasn't sinned. If you haven't sinned in your life, if you're perfect in your life, then go ahead and let her have it. Go ahead and throw a stone. And all the Pharisees, all the ones who were pointing fingers at her, realized that Jesus was right, that they too were just as guilty as she was, that they too were sinners. That's a good lesson that we need to learn in life, that we don't need to just stand in judgment over another person's behavior. When we're honest, we know that we don't have it all together either. None of us does. All of us are in need of Jesus' words of grace and forgiveness and compassion. I need forgiveness from God, and so do you. We confessed our sin earlier in the service, and we heard that good news of forgiveness. It's important for us to hear it over and over and over again. And in the story, slowly each and every accuser drops their rocks. They're reminded of their own sin. They're reminded of their own need for forgiveness. And one by one, they walk away. And finally, Jesus is there all alone with the woman, and he looks her in the eye. And with grace and with deep compassion, he simply says to her, "Where are your accusers? Where did they all go? Has no one condemned you?" And the woman looked at Jesus and said, "Sir, no one, not one, has condemned me." And Jesus says, "Then neither do I. Neither do I condemn you." What kind of God is this anyway? The God who says to her and says to us, "Then neither do I condemn you. I have compassion and love and grace for you." People of God, tonight you have come to worship, to hear God speak directly to you. In a minute, you're going to come forward and you're going to receive the true presence of Jesus right here, right now, in this place. And it's a great question for you to ask and to be asking over and over again. What kind of God is this anyway? What kind of God is going to meet us tonight? What kind of God is going to walk with you tomorrow? What kind of God is going to be with you next week? What kind of God is going to promise to walk with you throughout your whole journey of life? A God of anger and condemnation, or a God of love and compassion and grace? In this account with the woman who's caught in adultery, we see that this God of ours is not a God who is angry at us and mad at us, but rather a God who loves us and cares for us, forgives us, and then says, "I want to walk with you into a new future. I want to set you free." We're going to be singing in just a minute a song called "No Longer Slaves." We have a God who says, "You are no longer slave to your sin. I put you on a new path. I give you a new life." So Jesus is here tonight, and he's meeting you with love in his eyes and compassion and forgiveness in his heart. He says to you, just like he said to the woman, whatever you're carrying from your past, whether it's guilt or regrets or sin or mistakes, or maybe you're just fearful of something going on, he says, "Give them to me because I love you, and I forgive you, and I'm with you. And from now on, you can go from here and you can be set free to be that person with your unique gifts and your unique talents, because God has given you talents and gifts. He's given them to each and every one of us. He says you can use them and live for the glory of God." So what kind of God is this anyway? It's a God who loves you and me more than we can even imagine. And that is great, great news. Amen.